Beijing provokes tension again, escalating China-Japan friction. Beijing has once again stirred up trouble, heightening tensions with Japan. The Chinese aircraft carrier Liaoning transited the Miyako Strait, and its carrier-based aircraft deliberately violated Japanese airspace. Japan's Air Self-Defense Force scrambled fighter jets in response, but Chinese aircraft engaged in radar targeting of Japanese jets, an extremely dangerous, hostile action commonly understood as a signal of imminent attack. The incident provoked widespread condemnation across Japan's political spectrum. Yet behind Beijing's military provocation toward Japan appears to be a strategic objective: seizing Taiwan. And this comes at the worst possible moment for Beijing. The United States has just released its national security strategy, placing Taiwan as the top priority in its Indo-Pacific strategy, pledging to prevent a Chinese invasion and keep China's military power contained within the first island chain. Under such circumstances, Beijing's arguments are dismissed as the excuses of a cornered aggressor. Don't miss the next drop. Subscribe and hit the bell. China provokes again, attempting to escalate tension. On December 7th, Japan's Ministry of Defense announced that a Chinese J-15 carrier-based aircraft performed radar illumination on a Japanese F-15 fighter jet on December 6th. Where did these J-15 jets come from? The Chinese aircraft carrier Liaoning, escorted by 3 missile destroyers, sailed through the Miyako Strait between Okinawa and Miyakojima and headed into the Pacific. Japan accused 2 J-15 jets that took off in the Liaoning of violating Japanese airspace. Japanese F-15 fighter jets scrambled to intercept, but were intermittently radar targeted by Chinese aircraft. According to the Joint Staff Office of Japan's Ministry of Defense, the Liaoning and its 3 escort vessels passed through the Miyako Strait on December 6th and operated 270 kilometers south of Okinawa, east of Miyakojima, and west of Okinawa. The self-defense forces deployed naval and air assets to monitor them closely. Miyako Strait, a sensitive strategic location. The Miyako Strait is highly sensitive. It is only about 170 nautical miles from the Senkaku Islands and less than 500 kilometers from Taiwan. Observers believe this may be a possible route for a PLA invasion of Taiwan. The timing is also highly sensitive. Relations between Japan and China are deteriorating daily. Taiwan's national security officials warned that Beijing might launch the military exercise Joint Sword Sea against Taiwan on December 13th, the date Beijing designates as the National Memorial Day for the Nanjing Massacre. Movements of the Liaoning are being watched closely. PLA exercises could be rebranded into real operations. Taiwan's intelligence chief, Tsai Ming-yen, stated last week that December is typically a period of intense PLA military exercises, that he warned that Beijing may repackage routine exercises and long-range training activities with a special exercise codename, transforming them into targeted military operations. Emergency situation? Japan's defense minister holds midnight press conference. Chinese provocations have already threatened Japan's air security. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi held an emergency press conference at 2 a.m. on December 7th, an extremely rare occurrence. Koizumi stated, there were 2 radar illuminations. This incident exceeded the scope of safe flight and constitutes dangerous behavior. He said Japan had lodged a strong protest with Beijing. Later that day, Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi, during a visit to Ishikawa Prefecture, reaffirmed that the radar illumination by Chinese aircraft was extremely dangerous. Takaichi said, this incident is deeply regrettable. We have filed a strong protest and firmly demanded measures to prevent recurrence. We will respond calmly but decisively. She stressed that Japan would closely monitor Chinese military activity and take all necessary measures to ensure effective surveillance. Japan's opposition parties also criticized Beijing's actions that on December 7th, former Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda of the Constitutional Democratic Party said, this is extremely dangerous and excessively provocative. Regardless of the reason, Chinese aircraft should not engage in such actions. That afternoon, Japan's Vice Foreign Minister Kinyu Funakoshi summoned Chinese Ambassador Wu Jianghao and lodged a stern protest. Beijing's excuses. China's Ministry of National Defense argued that the Liaoning's operations were part of legitimate Farsi training consistent with international law and accused Japan of malicious disruption and harassment. Chinese Ambassador Wu Jianghao echoed Beijing's narrative, claiming that Japan interfered with China's routine training. Radar illumination signifies hostility. Target is Taiwan. Reuters noted that radar illumination is one of the most threatening actions a military aircraft can take, indicating potential attack and forcing the targeted aircraft to take evasive maneuvers. Chinese military analyst Li Yaqiang also admitted that radar illumination often signals strong hostility. However, Associate Professor Colin Koh at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore believes China-Japan military friction is unlikely to escalate into armed conflict, as this would depend on broader strategic considerations. According to Koh, the key uncertainty for China is that the U.S., under the U.S. Japan Security Treaty, may intervene if force is used. As long as Beijing's strategic priority remains Taiwan, conflict with Japan would be an unnecessary distraction. U.S. national security strategy mentions Taiwan 8 times. Beijing's ambition to seize Taiwan crashes directly into Trump's new national security strategy. On December 5th, the Trump administration released its first national security strategy, NSS, of the second term, placing the Indo-Pacific as a strategic priority and mentioning Taiwan 8 times, explicitly identifying the prevention of conflict in the Taiwan Strait as a top priority. The 33-page document identifies the Indo-Pacific as the second highest priority region after the Western Hemisphere. It notes that the region, comprising 1/3 of global nominal GDP, will continue to be a major economic and geopolitical battleground. Therefore, the U.S. must strengthen military capabilities in the Western Pacific to deter Chinese aggression and prevent Chinese military expansion anywhere in the First Island chain. Why Taiwan matters? The document highlights 2 core reasons. Taiwan's dominant role in semiconductor production. Taiwan is the gateway to the Second Island chain, dividing Northeast and Southeast Asia into 2 distinct theaters of war. Thus, the United States opposes any unilateral attempt to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. But preventing conflict requires preserving military superiority. U.S. military commitment. The strategy states, "We will build a force capable of denying aggression anywhere within the First Island chain." The document warns that if a hostile power controls the South China Sea, it may impose tolls or arbitrarily close one of the world's most critical trade routes. Thus, the strategy explicitly calls to prevent any attempt to seize Taiwan, urging key allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, to dramatically increase defense spending and open bases for joint investments in denial capabilities. IT notes. This links maritime security along the First Island chain, strengthening the capability to prevent any attempt to seize Taiwan or establish an unfavorable balance of power that would make defending the island impossible. Strangling China's navy at the throat. The new U.S. strategy clearly defines Taiwan as a strategic choke point, the natural geographical divider between Northeast and Southeast Asia, gateway to the Second Island chain, and key to U.S. military access. Therefore, trapping the PLA within the First Island chain is a core U.S. objective in the Trump 2.0 era. Analysts note that China hypes its new carrier Fujian, but it lacks combat experience and credible capability. Even worse, its ability to break through the First Island chain is limited that if war breaks out, it could be quickly blockaded or sunk. The First Island chain as China's barrier. To enter the Pacific from the South China Sea, the PLA Navy must pass the Bashi Channel. From the East China Sea, it must pass the Miyako Strait. China can sail beyond the First Island chain in peacetime, but in wartime, such attempts would face massive risk of destruction. Even if China deploys forces outside the chain ahead of conflict, returning safely afterward may be impossible. PLA Air Force is even more restricted. China's Air Force faces even greater challenges. It cannot reliably support naval operations beyond the First Island chain. Meanwhile, U.S. and allied aircraft can strike PLA vessels and track submarines from beyond the chain. U.S. bombers can launch long-range missiles from outside the chain to hit coastal targets, leaving Chinese jet fighters helpless. Taiwan is a base. China desperately needs Taiwan as a naval and air base to project power into the Pacific. Without Taiwan, China's Air Force can do almost nothing beyond the First Island chain. Thus, the U.S. aims not only to trap China inside the chain, but also to deny freedom of action within it. Strategic failure of the PLA. China threatens Japan with decisive blows. But in the U.S. Indo-Pacific defense system, the East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea are integrated, whereas China's northern, eastern, and southern military theaters are fragmented, lacking coordination. The Taiwan Strait is a choke point for China's naval mobility and can easily be blocked. The U.S. strategy plainly states, China must not be allowed to break out via Taiwan. Strategic shift to the Western Hemisphere, expelling China from Latin America. The new U.S. strategy clearly shifts emphasis to the Western Hemisphere, calling for the restoration of U.S. primacy in Latin America. The U.S. will prevent foreign rivals from establishing threatening military forces or controlling critical infrastructure in the Americas. Troop deployments will be shifted away from lower priority regions toward the Caribbean and Latin America. In other words, China's influence in America's backyard will be expelled. U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean. The U.S. currently deploys the largest number of warships in the Caribbean, with over 10 vessels and 14,000 personnel. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth vowed to restore U.S. military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. has already carried out 22 interdictions of suspected narcotics vessels and is considering strikes against targets inside Venezuela. Hegseth stated the U.S. military is prepared to secure access to critical routes, including the Panama Canal, the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, the Arctic, and Greenland. He stressed that regional allies must play their part. Mexico has made progress, but must move faster. Europe ranked third. In the 2025 National Security Strategy, Europe is ranked third in priority. The U.S. again insists Europe must develop self-defense capabilities, urging NATO members to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP and warning that Europe faces the risk of civilizational collapse. The U.S. pledges to mediate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, rebuild regional stability, and pursue strategic stability with Russia, while encouraging Europe to confront China's overcapacity, technology theft, cyber espionage, and hostile economic practices. The U.S. does not require Europe to assist militarily in the Indo-Pacific, but demands Europe join the economic war against China.